in employability. And towards the end of the session, I will be sharing some interesting and insightful examples of corporations that we can really learn from, and when we can go on to Q&A. So I guess that's the schedule for today. The state of work is what we'll get into right now. So if you look at the world of work today, as we all know, the pandemic has caused a huge economic catastrophe. In fact, if you have gone through the 2020 Goalkeepers report, it in fact talks about the extent of damage that has happened across economies, across the world. Now, this Goalkeepers report is published by Bill Gates and Melinda Foundation, and it simply says that we have been set back by 25 years in 25 weeks. Now, against this economic backdrop, I wish to discuss the state of work or the world of work today. So if you look at economics and the business landscape of today, it's in fact very consternating and appalling that we've been set back by 25 years in just 25 weeks. We're not talking about 4 or 5 years' time, we're talking about just 25 weeks. So 25 years in 25 weeks is a huge setback. Look at the next stat. It says loss of 255 million full-time jobs in 2020. And not just that, we're talking about 14% of world's workforce that lost their jobs between April and June 2020. Again, we're not talking about 1 year or 2 years. We're just talking about a span of 3 months. Between April and June 2020, 14% of the world's workforce lost their jobs. And as a result of that, what happened was $3.7 trillion in wages were lost, and the global GDP was set back by 4.4%. We're talking about huge damages done to the world of work. And as a result of what has happened, we're looking at 40% of workers who will have to upskill themselves. And this is what the World Economic Forum Future of Jobs Report 2020 says. And talking about skills, what McKinsey says is an opportunity that I had to work with McKinsey was in fact very profound and great. It's one of the top consultancies in the world, and they have these amazing economic reports that they come out with. And McKinsey says socio-emotional skills or life skills that we're talking about is far more important than the tech skills that you learn in boot camps in just 3 months, 6 months, or 12 months. Now, that's the state of work we're talking about. So is the world of work rosy? Is the world of work pink in health? Or are we traveling through murky waters? Is it trouble? So I want each of you to pay very close attention to these stats, because these are real-time stats that we're looking at. A damage done to the economies of the world, not just to one economy. We're talking about economies of the world. We're talking about unemployment being at its highest percentage. So against this backdrop, I want you to understand employability. And this is where we're going to answer this question: are graduates ready for work? So I want each and every student to pay very close attention to this. Now that I've established the current state of work, let me move on to employability. Now, as you can see, the slide is entitled Indian Graduates' Employability. So I have not factored in any other country's employability. It is exclusively about Indian graduates. So let me start by defining employability. For those of you who love terms to be explained and defined, employability is nothing but the ability to find work, as simple as that. So if you're talking about employability, look at the percentage from 2015 up until 2021. So if you check the percentage of employability in 2015, it was not that great. It was at 34%. Now, if you're looking at 2021, again, the employability of Indian graduates is at 46%. Now, what does that tell you? That tells you that over a period of 5 to 6 years, the percentage of employability has not exponentially increased. The gap is still wide, and it's important that we bridge this gap. So a couple of inferences from this slide that I want you guys to understand is this, that the percentage of employability as far as India is concerned is not really great. It stands at 46%, which means out of 100 people, 46 people who stand on the threshold of seeking employment do not possess the skills that they require to get into employment. That's as simply as it gets. There is a gap. And over the last 5 to 7 years, the improvement has not been great. So coming down or deciphering on to the most important inference that you need to take home from this slide is this. There is a disparity between what you learn as compared to what is required in today's world of work. And I'm simply talking about the kind of skill set that is required to thrive in the corporate world, be it a job, be it a career, or be it entrepreneurship that you're talking about. So the gap is huge. That is the inference that I want you to take from this particular slide. So this takes us to the next question. And the question is this is a $1 million question. Now, how do we equip students with skills necessary for in-demand career opportunities? Or if you slightly flip this question, the question that we've been asking educators, employers, and students is this: why have we not been able to equip students with the kind of skills that's imperatively necessary for in-demand career opportunities? Why has there been a gap between educators, employers, and students? That's the question that I'd like to answer very briefly, because time is a factor to reckon with. So I'll answer this question very briefly. Now, moving on to the underlying challenges. These challenges will most definitely answer this question as to why we've not been able to develop in people skills that are imperatively necessary to be out there in the corporate world making changes and changing destinies of companies. So that's what we're trying to answer. Now, if you look at the first challenge, the first challenge is an obsolete learning system. Now, what does that mean? An obsolete or an outdated learning system? So do we essentially have an outdated learning design? Do we essentially have a system that does not really work when people stand on the thresholds of getting into jobs? They don't possess the kind of skills that are important. So if we go back to the learning system or the design, I think that will kind of throw some light as to why we've not been able to do that. So here is where I'm going to tell you a very, very interesting story about how we have this current system of learning that we essentially have in educational institutions, be it schools or other educational institutions that we're talking about. So it's going to be a history lesson, and you're going to understand why we have a system that we currently have now. So for that, let me take you back to 300 years, as far back as 300 years, to the biggest corporation or to the biggest empire that existed at that particular point in time. Now, I'm sure you'd be able to answer this question if I were to ask you, which was the biggest empire that existed at that particular point in time? It was surely the Victorians, the British Empire. Now, mind you that when they had to run the British Empire, they had no computers, they had no telephones. It was only handwritten data, and they were constantly traveling by ships. Now, what did they do? If they had to run the empire, if they had to maintain records, it would have been very, very difficult for them. So what they decided to do was, they decided to build a global computer of people. That's what they decided to do. And they called it the bureaucratic administrative machine. Now, this bureaucratic administrative machine required lots and lots of people, loads of people, because you're talking about the biggest empire that they had to run. So they required loads and loads of people. Now, this is what they did to solve the problem of getting in more people into the system that they required to run the empire for. They said, we will build a machinery. Now, this is where I want you to pay very close attention. We are going to build a machinery is what they said. And we're going to name that machinery schools. Now, why do they do that? Because they said, we will definitely be able to churn out people with identical skills, because that's what we require. We require people with identical skills. We require a system that can churn out people with identical skills. So when I'm talking about identical skills, what exactly are we talking about? We're talking about the ability to read. We're talking about the ability to write. And we're talking about the simple ability to do arithmetics in your head. We need people with those skills because, mind you, everything was handwritten. So they established this machinery. And out from this machinery came people with identical skills, because if they had to pick somebody from New Zealand or from Canada and ship them directly to another country, those people had to be instantly functional. Now, this was the solution they came up with. So when I say the education system or the learning design is obsolete, I'm not saying it is broken, because there are a lot of people who let out this fashionable statement by saying, you know what, the education system is broken. The education system is not broken. The system is obsolete because it catered to a problem that they had then. And it was a beautiful solution. It was a robust solution that they had come up with. Imagine the influx of loads and loads of people into the bureaucratic administrative machine simply because they came up with this beautiful solution, a robust solution it was. But what happened to this system? With the advent of computers, a new set of skills came into the world of work. Now, unfortunately, we still have the same system that churns out people with identical skills. But what has happened to the world of work? That has changed completely. The evolution of work has changed completely, but we still have a system that produces people with identical skills and skills that we do not require at this point in time, skills that are outdated and absolutely obsolete. That's the system that I'm talking about. An obsolete learning system that has not been developed is one of the primary challenges of why we've not been able to equip our people, our students, our young adults to getting into corporates or to getting into the world of work and doing amazing things. That's one of the challenges. Now, the second challenge that you can see on the slide says educators not being gatekeepers of workforce talent. Now, those of you who disagree vehemently must take into account the fact that educators, all educators at different levels and stages, are gatekeepers of workforce talent. Now, when we don't understand this, then the gap widens exponentially. Then the kind of skill set that you prepare people with and for becomes totally obsolete. Now, I'll tell you why I'm talking about the world of work having evolved. Let me show you another slide that will exactly tell you about the kind of evolution that has happened in the world of work. And then I will get back to skill and talk about gatekeepers of workforce talent. So let's look at this slide. It says the evolution of social enterprise. It is not a high-end slide, so don't get startled or consternated over this slide. It's a very simple slide. Let me explain three important things from this slide. Now, if you look at the evolution of social enterprise, now, what does it mean when I say traditional organizations have become or are evolving into social enterprises. What does that mean? Now, years back, maybe 15 or 20 years back, we did have traditional organizations. But over the last 5 to 10 years, now this was taken from Deloitte Insights, which is another top consultancy, and this was published in the year 2018, where they spoke about the trends in human capital and where they also spoke about how the world of work is evolved. So traditional organizations have become social enterprises. What does that mean? That simply means that organizations today are not just about profits, like how it used to be years back. It is not just one-dimensional, it has become multi-dimensional. As you can see on the slide, there are different factors. I don't want to get into those factors, but what I want you to take away from this is understand the fact that organizations today are becoming social enterprises. They are becoming an ecosystem, which means the kind of collaboration that you're talking about is amazing. It is very different, like how it used to be siloed, but now it has become very collaborative. That's what I'm trying to tell you. So the world of work is completely changed. They no more operate in silos. They are not traditional organizations. So the kind of skill set that they require is totally different. That's what I'm talking about. So what is the kind of skill set that these organizations require people to possess? Look at these slides. Now, the global top 5 skills of 2025. We're not just talking about 2021 or 2020. Like how I mentioned when I spoke about the current state of work, we're talking about skills that are essential. We're talking about skills that completely do rounds in the world of work. Now, the World Economic Forum Skills Taxonomy Report 2021 says these are the top skills that companies require. Now, 75% of job success or career success depends on these skills. Now, a lot of people think that it's only tech skills that kind of, help you achieve success. But let me tell you, as a matter of fact, and all the top organizations and the consultancies across the world would agree and vouch for the fact that these are the skills that they look for in people. So you're talking about analytical thinking, innovation, active learning strategies, complex problem solving. How do you solve a problem that the community at large has? How do you do that? Creativity, originality, and initiatives. That's what the world looks at. The kind of skills that are required are these, and that's what I'm trying to tell you. If you have an obsolete learning design, if educators don't understand the fact that they are gatekeepers of workforce talent and they don't equip people or students or young adults with these kind of skills, then the percentage of employability that we will continue to have will be at 30s and 40s. And it'll be a very unfortunate scenario that our young adults would not find any kind of plausible employment in the world of work. So these are the top skills that we are talking about. So having established the challenges, underlying challenges in the world of work as to why we've not been able to equip our people, I wish to share with you a few examples of corporations. And using those examples, I want you to learn lessons that will help you embrace the future, that will prepare you. So the questions that you need to constantly ask yourself is, how do I rate my employability? What is my percentage of employability? I'm in my 3rd year of study. I'm in my 2nd year of study, and I'm doing a PG or a UG course. Now, when I complete these courses and I'm on the threshold of getting into the world of work, what is my rate of employability? Where do I stand? Do I stand a chance to get into some of the amazing corporations that will employ me, that will help me change their destinies? That's the question that each and every student needs to ask at this point in time. So let me get to some of the interesting examples. Now, if you have a pen and paper handy, I want you to take down some interesting details, because we're going to talk about some amazing corporations that we've heard of and we've been amazed about, but we have not really understood the details behind those corporations. So I want you to pay very close attention. I think I have another 15 minutes. Do I have another 15 minutes, Kelvin? Yes? Okay, thank you. So the first story, it was in the early 2000s. Some of the best minds in America were competing in a race. Now, what was that race about? Now, the goal was to develop a software engine that would connect internet user searches with targeted advertisements. So let me state the goal again. The goal was to create or develop a software engine that would connect internet user searches with targeted advertisements. Now, this would eventually open up the multi-billion-dollar industry. So the question was, which company would win? Now, I'm sure those of you who follow business, those of you who follow economics around the world would know for a fact that in the early 2000s, there was a company known as Overture. Overture was the name of the company. Now, this company was run by a man named Bill Gross, not Bill Gates, but Bill Gross. Now, Bill Gross was the guy who funded this company. In fact, this guy was the one who wrote the code for the model. He was a pioneer in the internet advertising model. In fact, he was the one who invented the pay-per-click advertising model. And this company was a company that generated millions and millions of dollars. And the kind of might, the kind of experience, the kind of resources that this company had was simply amazing. Now, if you looked at the competition, now let me tell you, Overture as a company with all its might was right here. And if you looked at its competition, it was way below. It was a huge mismatch in terms of experience, in terms of money, in terms of resources. That was the kind of mismatch we're talking about. So everybody in the business fraternity knew for a fact that Overture would win. That is what they thought. Because it was an overwhelming favorite to unlock the multi-billion-dollar industry. But again, the million-dollar question is, did Overture win? With all its might, with all its power, with all its resources generating multi-billion dollars, did it win? The answer is a resounding no. Overture did not win. Now, the entire business fraternity was surprised. How come Overture, with all its resources, did not win? So which company did win? Before I get into the company that won, let me dissect this for a few lessons. Now, please understand that you may have all the resources at your disposal. You may study in some of the biggest colleges. You may have some of the best resources at your disposal. You may have might and money. But if you don't understand the changing trends, if you don't understand that change is inevitable, if you don't understand innovation, if you don't understand that the world evolves and we need to constantly evolve to meet the requirements of the world of work, you will be obliterated. That's the lesson that Overture learned that day. It did not have people with the kind of skills that they required. Despite all the might they had, it did not have the right kind of skills within the organization to excel at something like this. Now, that's the lesson. Now, let's park this lesson for now. Let me get into the company that won, because I'm sure you'll be itching to know which company won. Now, the company that won was named, or is rather named, because we still have the company, is Google. The company that won was Google. At that point in time, the early 2000s, it was a young, startup company. It was a very young company. Now, let me give you a few details about Google that helped Google win so that you get to understand the kind of skill set that people had within the organization that really propelled them into the limelight of what they did and achieved as success. So here are a few very interesting details. I'm not sure if you've heard about these details, but these are interesting details that would come in handy for each student. So listen to the details. Now, let me take you back to May 24th, 2002, specifically into not the office of Google, but we're going to get into the kitchen of Google at 2400 Bayshore Parkway in Mountain View, California. Now, into the kitchen walks one of the founders whose name is Larry Page. I'm sure you all know. Now, Larry Page walks into the kitchen of Google with a note. Now, he takes this note and he pins the note on the wall. Now, what does the note say? That's very interesting because the note on the wall says, "These ads suck." Now, imagine an organization that existed in the 2000s, in the early 2000s, a very traditional business organization. But here's a founder that walks into the kitchen with a note, pins or sticks the wall on the note and walks away. Now, what kind of an organization would do that? What kind of a founder would do that? It's very surprising. But you know what he does? He does this and he leaves. Now, why did he stick this note up? Why did it say "these ads suck"? Now, mind you, this was the time when they were competing with Overture. And Google was not doing very great. And the mistakes of Google were on the wall. Now, what was the mistake? A very basic mistake, because I told you about what they were trying to achieve. They were trying to create a software engine that connected internet user searches with targeted ads. Now, this was what they were trying to do. But what was the mistake that was happening? For example, if somebody typed in Kawasaki, say, for example, David and Jefferson type Kawasaki H1B model bike. Now, what do they get? They got H1B visa. So the details don't really congru, are absolutely incongruent, right? So Larry Page was very upset. Here's what we're trying to achieve, but looking at all these mistakes that people are making, it's a very sad state. So he's very upset. So he takes all these examples along with this note that said "these ads suck," and he pins it on the wall. Now people walk by, read, and they just go away. But there was this very interesting gentleman. I want you to remember this name. I want you to brain tattoo this name into your heads, because this is a very important name as far as Google is concerned. Jeff Deans. Now, Jeff Deans walks into the kitchen. Now, Jeff Deans is an avid coffee drinker. He loved his cappuccinos. He loved his coffee. So he walks in. He takes a cup of coffee. He looks at the note. And mind you, Jeff Deans was not from the department where they were doing this project. He was not from AdWords engine, but he was from search. He was from another department. But Jeff Dean went through all the examples. He looked at all the examples and he became very curious. He became very inquisitive. So he looks at all the examples. He goes back into his cabin, looks at his desk, looks at all the files stacked on his desk. And he thinks for a moment, should I address these stacks of files, or should I start working on the AdWords engine project? So for a moment, he tells himself, I'm not going to look at these files, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to get into this project. And it was a Friday. So what he does is he works for some time, and then on a Saturday, he comes back to office, spends a lot of time, several hours working on that particular project. And then on a Sunday after 9 p.m., he puts his family to sleep, has dinner with them, puts the kids to sleep, and he goes back to office works on the project from 9 p.m. up until 5 a.m., beautifully outlines the fix for that problem, sends an email, climbs back into his bed, and falls asleep. This was Jeff Deans. Now, this is where the story gets a little more interesting, because when Jonathan Rosenberg in 2013 was wanting to write a book, he calls up Jeff Dean and he says, I would like to have a chat with you to better understand what transpired during the AdWords engine project. And you know what? When they met, Jeff Deans absolutely had no clue about what Jonathan Rosenberg was talking about. And Jonathan Rosenberg was surprised. You know why? Because the solution that he sent on an email worked, and it worked wonders. Because of which, and because of that solution, from $6 million, Google's profits rose to $99 million. And not just that, in 2014, per day earning of Google from the AdWords engine project was $160 million. Now imagine, what kind of a man is this? Somebody who contributed to $160 million says, you know what, I don't really remember these details. What are you talking about? Because when Jonathan Rosenberg insisted and pressed upon Jeff Deans to share details, he said, I actually don't remember. Because in here, in this company, this is normal. This is what people do. This is how people think. This is normal. And he walked away. Now, the lesson that we can learn is this. It was not just because of the kind of tech skills that Jeff Dean possessed, but we're talking about the kind of skills that took him to the limelight and had him contributed to a whopping $160 million and yet remain humbled and down to earth. Despite all the success, he remained humble and down to earth. What kind of a man is this? And the lessons that we have today is he was absolutely curious about what he wanted to do. He knew for a fact that it was a game-changing moment that he had to espouse, that he had to get into. He was always curious. He went on that trip, leaving his work. He went on that trip because he understood the trends. He understood what was now, what was required at this point in time. If Google had to become one of the best companies that it was not at that point in time, that was a game-changing moment, and he espoused it with all the skills that he had. So the takeaway, as far as the traits to remember or traits to embrace the future with. Do I have another 5 minutes, Calvin? Yeah? Okay, thank you. So if you're talking about traits to embrace the future with, if you're talking about skill set that each and every student needs to possess and constantly think about are these. Be curious, always curious, question status quo. Go on a mission of discovery. Change is inevitable is something that you need to understand, and innovation is no different. Embrace tomorrow's relevance. Now, a lot of people get stuck with trying to equip yourselves with skills that are obsolete. It is because of this that we have a scientific evidence in employability that says India's employability stands at 46%, an appalling 46%. So if we have to embrace the future, then we need to think differently. Now, I think I have enough time for one more example. Very quickly, let me share the timeline of Yahoo. For those of you who are not aware of the timeline, I'm sure a lot of you must be aware of what transpired in Yahoo between 2000 and 2015. These are lessons that we can learn from these corporations. These are lessons that will hold us in really good stead. So look at Yahoo. In fact, Yahoo was one of the main players in the advertising market in 2005. But what went wrong? How did they plummet from an evaluation of $125 billion to a meager $4.8 billion buyout by Verizon, is what I would like to talk about. Very, very few details. Now, Yahoo as a company did not understand or pay attention to the changing trends. They wanted to focus on being a media giant because of what they were doing and because of their initial success. They paid attention to that. They paid attention to their present. They did not want to embrace the tomorrow that was right there knocking on their doors. They did not pay attention to consumer trends. They did not pay attention to the kind of user experience that consumers required from Google. They did not do that. And they had a lot of missed opportunities. Let me share very few missed opportunities. I'm not doing a complete case study on Yahoo, but I would like to just present a few facts so that this will help us understand where they went wrong. Now, in 2000, their evaluation was $125 billion. Now, I'm not sure if anybody knows for a fact that in 2002, they had an opportunity to buy Google. Imagine. They had a huge opportunity to buy Google, and because of a hassle or a haggle, rather, between $1 or $2 million, $1 billion, the deal just fell away. They were unsuccessful in their buyout. In 2002, this happened. They had an opportunity to buy Google, and they didn't. And in 2006, again, they had another opportunity to buy Facebook. Imagine what their story would have been had they espoused the kind of relevance that they had to at that particular point in time. If only they had embraced their tomorrow, things would have been totally different. In 2006, they missed that opportunity. Again, in 2008, they had an offer from Microsoft for $45 billion, and that was also turned down. Mind you, between 2002 and 2008, there were many CEOs that changed desks in Yahoo, and Yahoo was not really doing well. So they had their opportunity at $45 billion, but they rejected that. And in 2015, that was the final nail on their coffin. And they had to agree and settle for $4.8 billion. That's the fall of Yahoo, simply because of the fact that they did not embrace their tomorrow. They did not understand that change is inevitable. Change is the only factor that is constant. And if we don't espouse change, if we don't embrace change and innovation, then we will be completely wiped out from the market. Those are the lessons that we have right in front of our eyes today. So the lessons that I would like to leave you all with is this: be curious, be inquisitive, go on that mission if you have to, at all cost, and understand and know for a fact that change is inevitable for you to embrace tomorrow's relevance. Now, a very quick recap of the session. We in fact started with the current state of work, and we established the fact that the world of work today is not very rosy. It is murky, it is troubled. And I presented to you all the kind of facts that would appall you at every stage. And we looked at employability. Employability is an appalling 46%. We can go gaga over it and say, you know what, we have increased over the last 5 to 6 years, but unfortunately, let me tell you, the gap is huge. It's time that we bridge this gap. It's time that educational institutions and educators understand that they are gatekeepers of workforce community and talent. And we also looked at some of the underlying challenges, which are an obsolete system. So if you have to better the kind of learning design and system, I would really urge each and every educator on this call to look at the kind of systems that we operate with. Well, let me tell you, as a matter of fact, there are only 12 innovative curriculums in the world today. We are only talking about 12. Out of the thousands and thousands of educational institutions that we have in the world today, there are only 12 curriculums, innovative ones, with a very, very different kind of agenda. We also looked at some of the examples of corporations that we can learn from, the Googles, the Yahoos, and Overtures. And some of these lessons really ring a bell. It kind of helps us understand the lessons that we need to hammer into our heads for us to be really acceptable and employable. And last of all, some important traits as lessons I leave with you all. Be always curious, and this will help us embrace the world of work that lies ahead for all of us. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. And I would like to open the session to the floor. If you have any questions that you'd like to ask, any points that you would like to discuss, now is the time. So let me open this to the floor. Calvin?
Yeah, Mr. Ranjan, yeah, he has got a question there. Mr. Ranjan,
yes, please go ahead. Is it on chat, or are you going to unmute yourself? Yeah.
I have unmuted, yes. So first of all, thank you for the presentation. I thought it was very informative. I wish this would go on a little longer so we could pick your brains and get more information. But if I have to ask you to give a short yes or no answer to the question that is in our heading, I'm assuming it will be no, but can you confirm that? What would be your short answer?
Okay, those are the kind of answers that put you in trouble. So thank you for the question. I'm sure you would know for a fact that it's a resounding no, not just a no. It's a very emphatic no, because having worked in corporations across the world, with some of the having rubbed shoulders with some of the biggest names in the corporate world, and having also been in recruitment for around 4 to 5 years, when I used to work with Citi, I can very emphatically tell you that it's a no. It's a no. And one of the primary challenges that I did witness was the challenge that I spoke about. It's to do with the obsolete learning system that we have that in fact causes the divide. So yes, it is a no.
Okay. There's still so much more that I want to discuss, but in the interest of time, I think, sir,
yes, I've got my details on this slide. So if there are questions that you wish to ask, then we can take it offline.
More on the answer you've just given.
Yeah.
If the answer is no, then who's responsible? Would you peg the entire responsibility on academia, or?
I wouldn't want to pinpoint or put one particular segment in a spot of bother, but the blatant truth is that we always tend to look at educators and educational institutions as gatekeepers of workforce talent. Because if you're talking about a system where people get into the system and stay within the system for 14 to 15 years or even more, and when they come out, you expect them to be relevant, you expect them to be productive, not just receptive. Because when you talk about skill set, you're talking about productive skill set that is required in all these corporations. We're not just talking about jobs, you're talking about entrepreneurship, we're talking about careers as well. So not just about getting a job. So if we have to look at that particular segment, then I would lay more emphasis on educators.
Got it. Thank you.
What is the one thing that a student should adapt to it?
Calvin, that's a very easy question, because you have mentioned one thing. It is not always one thing. It is one too many things. You know, as I mentioned earlier, because time was a factor to reckon with, I did settle for very few aspects. There are quite a few aspects. But what I essentially want students or young adults to understand is what is happening out there that I need to constantly look at for the kind of evolution that's happening across the world, for the kind of business landscape that we have, for the kind of trends that are reshaping organizations today. What is the kind of skill set that I need to equip myself with is one particular question that I want all students to constantly ask themselves. So to answer to your question, this is one and the most primary question that they need to ask themselves. Any other questions?
Yes, Nirba ma'am, you can. That's a question. Yeah.
Thank you so much, sir. I thoroughly enjoyed the presentation, and the area which you have discussed is an innovative way for the students to be enter for the corporate world, sir. So there are many students who really want to enter into the HR for the corporate sector, and where HR is more or less in the prior world, if you see, they are more into engagement and recruitments and all. So in the corporate world, do you see there are some more innovative areas that has come up, which will really fascinate the students to adopt for this? Because nowadays students are more fascinated for cloud computing or architecture or financial areas. So if we talk about the HR section, which has always been one of the very traditional way, so is there some new areas that has been explored for the corporate which students should put more focus if they want to be a HR journalist or an HR professional?
Okay, that's a good question because I'm aligned, in fact, into HR. If you look at capabilities and performance and learning and development, all these units or departments are aligned into HR. So the kind of scope or the kind of expansion that has happened in HR is really amazing. There are new areas like people analytics that's doing rounds today. And it is not just about maintaining records of people who work in the organizations. When you talk about people analytics, it's a huge domain where you try to understand competencies that are required, competencies that people come in with, and how important it is for them to grow into a different set of competencies. So the kind of field that HR has become is really very different. The kind of retention techniques, the kind of employee engagements that are done within HR have transformed greatly over the last 5 years. So those of them who would like to get into human resource, one of the principal questions that they need to answer is, how do I build human capital that can wade through unpredictability? Because you're talking about unpredictable times. When everything is fine and rosy, you don't need much. But when you're talking about unpredictable times, you're talking about how human capital can be built. Now, this is not a question that you just answer in a sentence, or it just takes around 3 months or 6 months to answer this question. This is a question that you need to constantly keep answering because of what has happened. If you look at times that we are in and for times to come, the only question or the only challenge that will remain is this. And as HR professionals, if we can look for answers to this question, we'll be doing a great job. So for those people who would like to get into HR, the scope is huge and they'll definitely be able to get into good areas of HR. Any other question? I have David and Jefferson. Are they still on the call? If you have any questions, you can ask me. They wanted me to mention their names. Yeah, I'm done. Yeah. Anything else?
Yeah, Geet, you can go ahead. Unmute yourself.